Imagine that you're a business owner. You try to do right by your employees, but you also try to do right by the customer by keeping prices reasonable. Recently, there has been a federal mandate that has increased the federal minimum wage by $1.75. To the common man, this does not seem like much, but to you, the business owner, this means drastic changes to your employees' paychecks and eventually consumer prices. In this scenario, do you believe that a higher minimum wage would make things better? Would the ripple effects do more damage than help? What would those ripple effects be exactly? And what would a higher minimum wage mean for our country? Today I'm going to persuade my audience that if our country were to raise the federal minimum wage, that it would have adverse effects to our economic system in the long run. After doing extensive research, I hope to persuade each of you to realize the risks and long-term damage that raising our federal minimum wage would cause. I hope to achieve this by sharing with you the facts of this topic. The facts on this topic include raising the minimum wage would mean a disadvantage to low-skilled workers, an increase in unemployment levels, an increase in consumer goods and in the prices of consumer goods and services, and why the free market should be the determining factor that sets the minimum wage for our country, not the federal government. A lot of people in our nation think that raising the minimum wage would solve a lot of our problems, when in reality this would actually be just a Band-Aid fix to our nation's gaping economic wounds. My first point is that raising the minimum wage would be a disadvantage to low-skilled workers. According to research done by New York Times columnist David Brooks, many believe that raising the minimum wage would be the #1 solution to helping get low-wage workers out of the hole. However, as he proves later on, that would be the very thing that would keep them in the hole. His research and article states that lower-skilled workers do not justify a higher wage ratio based on work quality and skill. Basically, if businesses are having to pay more, they're not going to hire as many people, and they're definitely not going to hire any low-skilled workers. Economics expert Dr. James Dorn backs up this claim with this statistic. A 10% increase in minimum wage leads to a 1 to 3% decrease in employment of low-skilled workers in the short term, and a larger decrease in the long run. This leads to my second point. My second point is that raising the minimum wage would mean a rise in unemployment levels in our country. Many look at the research of raising the minimum wage and see that it would help the employment for our nation. However, that would be just the short-term effect. In the long run, a higher minimum wage would be a detriment to employment levels. According to the Congressional Budget Office, although a higher pay would mean higher family income and a decrease in poverty, low-wage workers would most likely be eliminated. Basically, yes, pay would be better, but there would be less jobs on the market. The Congressional Budget Office gives the statistic that if minimum wage were increased to $10.10, the projected loss would be about 500,000 jobs, or 1 million workers. Liberty University student and author of the article, "Decision to Raise Minimum Wage is Not Worth It," Jacob Teller said it best when he stated that companies have two options in response to extra costs of a minimum wage increase. In order to maintain profits, they can either cut costs or increase revenue. Both options would harm the economy. Cutting costs means most likely firing employees or not hiring as many. Either way, there will be fewer jobs. And this ties into my third point. My third point is that raising the minimum wage means higher prices everywhere else. I feel that Jacob Teller said it best when he stated in his article that a rise in wages seems good for workers until other effects are considered. If the minimum wage is increased, the money has to come from somewhere, and he's right. According to a 2013 article by the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago, it was discovered that if minimum wage was increased, restaurants would pass on 100% of the increased labor costs to the consumer. And when businesses were asked, they would do the same. Finally, research in 2008 by the Journal of Human Resources found that the prices unambiguously increase in response to a minimum wage change. This leads me to my final point. The federal government should not be who sets the minimum wage in our country. It should be the free market. Imagine having the federal government decide the minimum wage is like having your granddad pick out your prom dress. The dress would be out of fashion and it probably would not fit right, much like our nation's minimum wage standard today. Dr. Mark J. Perry backs up this argument when he stated that the government-mandated minimum wages are always arbitrary and almost never based on any sound economic cost-benefit analysis. Dr. Per Byland adds to this when he stated the federal minimum wage disrupts the balance of the market and prohibits the creation of new jobs. Basically, the government does not have any reason to be involved in setting the minimum wage for our country. It's not their jurisdiction. The free market, or economic systems based on competition rather than government rules, should be what decides the minimum wage. It does not make sense to have a blanket minimum wage for our entire country. From these facts, I hope that I have been able to persuade you to see why raising the minimum wage would not bring long-lasting benefits to our nation. I hope that I was able to expose the wolf in sheep's clothing by giving you the facts about raising the minimum wage and why its effects and what its effects on our country would be. By sharing with you these facts, that increasing the minimum wage would result in a disadvantage to low-skilled workers, an increase in unemployment levels, an increase in the prices of consumer goods and services, and finally why the free market should be the determining factor that determines the minimum wage. I hope you now understand the negative effects of increasing the minimum wage in our country. So, do you think that raising the minimum wage would fix our country's problems?